Today, we're about to explore the terrifying last moments of three snake enthusiasts. From a man who trusted a garage sale textbook to handle rattlesnakes, to an apartment dweller who believed YouTube made him an expert with a deadly snake. Our journey begins in the Arizona desert, where the terrifying last moments of Craig Winters became a chaotic nightmare. It was March 15th, 2016, in a rural area outside Phoenix, Arizona. The converted garage sat behind a modest ranch house, its windows painted black from the inside. Makeshift plywood shelving held dozens of cracked aquariums held together with duct tape. Craig Winters was 34, a part-time pizza delivery driver who had become obsessed with venomous snakes after reading a single outdated herpetology textbook from 1987 that he found at a garage sale. The textbook clearly emphasized professional snake hooks and restraint tubes, equipment Craig neither owned nor believed he needed. Despite the book's detailed safety protocols, Craig had completely ignored these sections, focusing only on the parts describing different species and their venom potency. Craig believed that reading one 30-year-old book made him qualified to handle the deadliest snakes in North America. He had never consulted current literature, spoken to veterinarians, or contacted experienced keepers. His handling technique consisted of using modified kitchen utensils and homemade tools he had crafted based on crude diagrams from his ancient textbook. The garage was a disaster waiting to happen. No safety equipment, no anti-venom, no emergency protocols, and no one even knew what he was doing. Craig frequently referenced his worn textbook during handling sessions, actually stopping mid-procedure to flip through pages while holding dangerous snakes. The book's safety recommendations were 3 decades out of date, and Craig was following techniques that had been proven deadly years before he was even born. Western diamondback rattlesnakes are among the largest venomous snakes in the southwestern United States. Adults average 3 to 5 feet in length, weighing 3 to 4 pounds. They can strike at speeds reaching 2/3 their body length in under 0.2 seconds. These snakes are highly defensive when cornered or stressed. Their venom is primarily hemotoxic, designed to break down blood cells and tissue, with a typical adult bite delivering 250 to 350 milligrams of venom. The venom contains a complex mixture of enzymes that destroy red blood cells, damage blood vessel walls, and prevent normal clotting. Effects that can prove fatal without proper medical intervention. The incident occurred when Craig made perhaps the most foolish decision of his short career as a snake keeper. He decided to move his largest and most dangerous snake, a 4-foot Western diamondback that he had illegally acquired from an out-of-state dealer, to what he thought was a better enclosure. The snake had been crammed into a cracked 20-gallon aquarium, barely able to move, and had become a coiled ball of pure aggression. Craig consulted his ancient textbook, which recommended proper snake hooks and restraint tubes for safe handling. Instead of recognizing that he was completely unequipped for this task, Craig decided to make his own handling tool. He bent a coat hanger into a loop, apparently believing that 30 cents worth of wire would protect him from one of North America's deadliest snakes. As Craig opened the cracked aquarium lid, the rattlesnake immediately went into full defensive mode, coiling tightly and rattling continuously. Craig attempted to slip his bent coat hanger around the rattlesnake's neck, apparently believing he could lasso a lightning-fast predator like he was roping cattle. The stressed animal struck upward through the pathetic restraint with explosive speed. The strike lasted less than half a second, but the snake's fangs sank deep into Craig's right forearm just below the elbow, delivering a substantial venom load directly into his tissue before immediately withdrawing. Blood immediately poured from 2 distinct fang marks, each several millimeters apart. Craig dropped his useless coat hanger tool and stumbled backward, knocking over several containers and sending other snakes into defensive frenzies. Rather than immediately calling for help, Craig made his second catastrophically stupid decision of the day. He sat down and actually tried to time his symptoms while consulting the book's treatment section. The text recommended applying ice and elevating the wound, practices no longer recommended by modern medicine and unlikely to help his situation. The swelling had already begun creeping past his elbow when Craig finally looked up from the book's yellowed pages. His fingers had started tingling, and a metallic taste filled his mouth. Symptoms the textbook had mentioned, but described in clinical, detached language that bore no resemblance to the reality now consuming his arm. He tried flexing his hand and found his grip weakening noticeably. The bite site had turned a dark purple red, with streaks of discoloration radiating outward like twisted branches. Still, Craig convinced himself that the ice and elevation were working, that he just needed a few more minutes for the swelling to stop. The clock on the garage wall ticked past the 20-minute mark since the bite. Craig spent 35 precious minutes following these outdated instructions while the venom spread through his lymphatic system. During this time, swelling began at the bite site and started progressing up his arm at an alarming rate. More critically, early venom effects had begun impairing his blood's clotting mechanisms, setting the stage for what would become a fatal combination of injuries. The pain quickly intensified beyond anything Craig had imagined from his textbook's sanitized descriptions. His arm began to feel heavy and numb, while the swelling continued expanding. Craig noticed his heart rate increasing dramatically and began experiencing waves of nausea and dizziness as the venom's hemotoxins began destroying his red blood cells. When Craig began experiencing severe symptoms and his blood pressure started dropping, he finally realized that his textbook might not have prepared him for reality. The venom had caused significant coagulopathy, making his blood unable to clot properly, a condition that would prove catastrophic. Craig stumbled to his car and attempted to drive to a hospital, but his condition rapidly deteriorated as the venom's effects intensified. His vision blurred from the envenomation effects, and he lost control of the vehicle as his coordination failed. His car rolled through an intersection and struck a utility pole with devastating force. The crash caused severe internal trauma, including ruptured organs and massive hemorrhaging. With his blood's clotting mechanisms actively deteriorating from the venom, Craig's body could not control the internal bleeding from these major injuries. The combination of progressive coagulopathy and severe trauma created a medical emergency that would prove unsurvivable. When paramedics arrived, they found Craig unconscious with severe swelling at the bite site and signs of massive internal bleeding that his compromised blood could not control. His blood pressure was critically low, and his breathing was shallow and irregular. He was immediately intubated and transported to a trauma center with lights and sirens. At the hospital, doctors faced a complex challenge. Hospital laboratory tests confirmed severe venom-induced coagulopathy that made it impossible to control the substantial internal bleeding from the vehicle collision. Despite aggressive treatment, including blood transfusions and emergency antivenom administration, the combination of major trauma and progressive clotting failure had created fatal complications. Craig died approximately 4 hours after the bite from complications of massive internal hemorrhaging. The severe crash injuries, which included ruptured internal organs, became unsurvivable due to the venom's effects on his blood's ability to clot. Medical examiners determined that while the 25-minute delay in seeking treatment had allowed venom-induced coagulopathy to develop, it was the combination of this blood disorder with severe collision trauma that proved fatal. The hemotoxins had disrupted his blood's clotting mechanisms, making the internal bleeding from the crash impossible to control. Investigators discovered the garage collection during a property search and were appalled by the conditions. The 12 venomous snakes, all illegally possessed without permits, were found in deplorable housing, with several dead from dehydration and temperature extremes. The case was ruled an accidental death caused by unvenomation-induced coagulopathy, complicated by vehicular trauma. Animal control officers safely removed the surviving snakes and transferred them to licensed facilities. The investigation revealed that Craig had no permits, no training, and no business handling animals that required years of experience to manage safely. Craig's garage experiment had ended with a rattlesnake's fangs and a fatal collision. In a Florida apartment complex, another enthusiast would learn that online confidence means nothing against real venom. It was June 8, 2015, in a suburban apartment complex near Orlando, Florida. The one-bedroom apartment had been transformed into a reptile nightmare, with snake enclosures covering every available floor space. Plastic storage bins with holes drilled in the lids housed 14 snakes, including several venomous species. The overwhelmed ventilation system created condensation and mold growth on the walls, while the constant smell of animal waste made the space nearly uninhabitable. Trent Wilson was 26, an unemployed college dropout who had convinced himself he was a snake expert after binge-watching online videos and following social media accounts of reptile keepers. He had spent months consuming content about snake handling, gravitating toward the most dramatic videos of people working with venomous species. Trent believed that watching enough videos qualified him to handle deadly animals, a delusion that would prove fatal. Trent's collection had grown far beyond his apartment's capacity, but he had managed to hide it from building management through a combination of air fresheners, careful timing, and sheer luck. His handling method consisted of wearing thick leather work gloves that he was convinced would protect him from any bite. Despite numerous online warnings that gloves provided no real protection against venomous snakes. The apartment was a ticking time bomb. It violated lease agreements, local ordinances, and basic common sense. But Trent had successfully concealed his illegal zoo for 8 months. He had no emergency plans, no proper equipment, and relied entirely on online videos for care information, despite most content creators explicitly warning viewers about the extreme dangers of venomous species. The enclosures had become increasingly filthy over the past 2 weeks, with waste accumulating and water bowls going days without proper cleaning. Several of his snakes had become more defensive during feeding attempts, striking at the enclosure walls when he approached, and refusing food altogether. Trent had watched videos where experienced keepers discussed temporary feeding strikes, but those same videos emphasized proper enclosure sizes and professional-grade handling equipment that his setup completely lacked. The animal's defensive behavior and feeding refusals had become more frequent, yet Trent continued following his established routine with the same inadequate tools. Trent had been putting off cleaning several enclosures for over a week because the animals had become increasingly defensive. Instead of recognizing this as a clear warning that his setup was failing, he decided to push forward with maintenance using equipment that was laughably inadequate for the task. Gaboon vipers are massive African snakes, averaging 4 to 5 feet in length and weighing 15 to 20 pounds, making them among the heaviest venomous snakes in the world. They possess the longest fangs of any venomous snake, reaching up to 2 inches in length, capable of penetrating deeply into tissue and delivering massive venom loads. Their venom is primarily hemotoxic, causing severe tissue destruction, massive internal hemorrhaging, and cardiovascular collapse. A single bite can inject 350 to 600 milligrams of venom, among the highest yields of any snake, making untreated bites extremely dangerous and potentially fatal. Trent's fatal mistake came when he made a decision that defied all logic and common sense. He decided to clean the enclosure of a 4-foot Gaboon viper that he had illegally purchased from an out-of-state dealer and had been refusing food for 2 weeks. Trent was wearing his thick leather work gloves and planning to use a pair of barbecue tongs, apparently believing this combination would protect him from a snake whose fangs could penetrate materials far tougher than leather. As Trent opened the container lid, the Gaboon viper raised its massive triangular head slightly and took a defensive posture, its body tensing in preparation. The snake had been living in chronic stress for weeks in a plastic storage bin barely large enough for the snake to stretch out, making it extremely reactive to any disturbance. Trent attempted to use the barbecue tongs to move the snake while reaching into the container with his other hand to remove the water bowl. This meant he was trying to control a deadly animal with a tool designed for flipping hamburgers while putting his hand directly into striking range. The Gaboon viper struck with explosive speed that contradicted its reputation for sluggish movement, its mouth opening impossibly wide to reveal the 2-inch fangs. The snake's massive fangs penetrated deeply through Trent's leather glove as if it were made of tissue paper, sinking their full length deep into his left hand between his thumb and index finger. The bite lasted only seconds, long enough to deliver an enormous venom load directly into the tissue. When Trent finally pulled free, venom and blood coated his torn glove. He quickly removed the glove and saw 2 deep puncture wounds bleeding heavily, with the holes visibly larger than any snake bite he had seen in videos. The wounds were alarmingly deep, with tissue already beginning to swell around the fang marks. Instead of immediately calling for emergency help, Trent decided to apply pressure to stop the bleeding and elevated his hand above his heart. He was following generic advice from online videos about treating snake bites, not realizing this guidance was meant for non-venomous bites and was completely inappropriate for his situation. Over the next 20 minutes, Trent watched his hand swell to grotesque proportions while experiencing pain that intensified beyond anything he had imagined. The swelling progressed with alarming speed, causing his entire hand to become discolored and extremely painful. The tissue around the bite site began turning dark purple as the venom destroyed blood vessels and cells. When the swelling reached his forearm and he began feeling nauseous and lightheaded, he finally began to understand that he was in serious trouble. The pain had become absolutely excruciating, far beyond anything described in the casual videos he had watched. The swelling continued expanding despite his elevation efforts, his hand now resembling a grotesque balloon. Trent began experiencing rapid heartbeat, profuse sweating, difficulty breathing, and confusion as the massive venom load began affecting his cardiovascular system. When he finally called for emergency assistance almost an hour after the bite, Trent could barely speak coherently due to the pain and his rapidly deteriorating condition. The venom had begun causing widespread internal hemorrhaging and tissue death throughout his hand and arm. By this time, the toxins had spread through his lymphatic system and were causing his blood pressure to plummet dangerously. Paramedics found Trent conscious but in severe distress, with massive swelling that had progressed past his elbow and obvious signs of systemic envenomation, including dangerously low blood pressure, rapid pulse, and visible bruising beginning to appear on his arm and chest. At the hospital, doctors faced multiple complications. Antivenom was not immediately available on site and had to be located through regional wildlife networks, causing critical delays in treatment. The massive venom load had already begun causing extensive damage throughout Trent's system. Laboratory tests revealed rapidly deteriorating clotting factors and abnormal bleeding parameters. By the time antivenom was located and administered, Trent had developed disseminated intravascular coagulation, a life-threatening condition where the blood clots uncontrollably throughout the body while simultaneously losing its ability to clot properly. Medical staff noticed bleeding from IV insertion sites and other signs of severe coagulopathy. The venom had triggered a cascade of circulatory collapse. Trent's blood pressure continued dropping as his cardiovascular system failed to maintain circulation. The DIC caused widespread clotting in small blood vessels, while paradoxically causing uncontrollable bleeding elsewhere. His kidneys began failing from the combination of hypotension, toxic venom metabolites, and the breakdown products from destroyed tissue overwhelming his organs. Trent died approximately 14 hours after the bite from cardiovascular collapse and multiple organ failure. The massive venom load from the Gaboon viper had triggered a cascade of circulatory complications that his body could not overcome despite aggressive medical intervention. The apartment investigation revealed Trent's hidden collection, with several animals found dead from neglect and completely inappropriate housing conditions. Trent's phone contained dozens of downloaded videos about snake handling, but investigators noted that none of his saved content specifically addressed venomous species, safety protocols, or emergency procedures. The medical examiner ruled the death accidental, caused by envenomation from illegally possessed venomous reptiles. Trent's apartment nightmare had concluded with cardiovascular collapse. Meanwhile, in a California basement, a would-be breeder would discover that technical manuals can't replace years of hands-on experience. It was October 14, 2017, in a residential neighborhood outside Sacramento, California. The finished basement had been converted into what appeared to be a professional reptile facility, with custom-built wooden shelving and sophisticated lighting systems. Carl Fleming was 38, a former warehouse supervisor who had become convinced he understood snake breeding after purchasing and memorizing a comprehensive 800-page reptile breeding manual written by European herpetologists. Carl had focused on the profit potential sections, while skipping over the extensive safety warnings and experience requirements outlined throughout the book. He had created elaborate charts and schedules based on the manual's breeding protocols, but had never worked with experienced breeders or handled live venomous snakes before purchasing his collection. The basement operation looked impressive to anyone who didn't know better, with labeled containers and detailed record-keeping systems copied directly from the manual's organizational suggestions. However, Carl's handling technique involved using modified aquarium equipment and homemade restraint devices that he had constructed based on equipment diagrams in his manual, without any understanding of their proper application or critical safety features. Carl had invested thousands of dollars in his setup, purchasing expensive temperature control equipment and professional-grade lighting systems. The impressive appearance of his facility had convinced him that he was operating at the same level as experienced breeders, despite having zero hands-on training or mentorship from anyone who actually knew what they were doing. Carl's basement was completely isolated from the main house, with thick walls that would muffle any sounds of distress. His family was unaware of the true extent of his collection, believing he kept only a few harmless snakes for educational purposes. The basement's separate entrance meant Carl could work for hours without anyone knowing his activities, schedule, or condition. Eastern coral snakes are highly venomous elapids, averaging 2 to 3 feet in length, with distinctive red, yellow, and black banding. Their venom contains powerful neurotoxins that attack the nervous system, causing progressive paralysis, respiratory failure, and death if untreated. Unlike hemotoxic venoms that cause obvious local tissue damage, coral snake venom produces minimal initial symptoms at the bite site, while systematically shutting down the victim's nervous system. Bites may seem minor initially, but the neurotoxic effects can progress rapidly to complete respiratory paralysis and death within hours. Carl's critical error came when he made a decision that perfectly demonstrated how dangerous a little knowledge can be. He decided to separate 2 eastern coral snakes that had been housed together based on his manual's breeding recommendations, but Carl had completely misunderstood the species' behavioral patterns and handling requirements. The two coral snakes had been coexisting peacefully, but Carl was convinced they needed individual housing based on a breeding protocol he had misinterpreted from his manual. In reality, the snakes were not showing any signs of stress or aggression, but Carl's interference would create a dangerous situation that his inexperience couldn't handle. Carl decided to use his homemade restraint tube, which he had constructed from PVC pipe based on a diagram in his manual. Carl had misunderstood the critical measurements and safety features, creating a device that was not only useless, but actually more dangerous than no restraint at all. The tube opening was too large to provide proper control, and the length was insufficient for safe handling of the species. As Carl attempted to guide the first coral snake into his inadequate restraint device, the snake immediately began struggling against the tube. The animal's defensive behavior escalated as Carl tried desperately to maintain control of a situation that was spiraling beyond his capabilities. Carl made the fatal decision to reposition the tube to gain better control, apparently believing he could manage an increasingly stressed, venomous snake through trial and error. The coral snake managed to twist around the pathetic restraint and strike at Carl's right hand, sinking its small but deadly fangs into the webbing between his thumb and index finger and delivering a full load of neurotoxic venom before Carl could react. Carl immediately dropped the useless tube and stepped back, examining what appeared to be two tiny puncture wounds with minimal bleeding. Unlike the dramatic tissue damage he had read about with other venomous species, the coral snakebite looked almost insignificant, a deception that would prove fatal. Following his manual's emergency protocol section to the letter, he immediately noted the time of the bite and began documenting his symptoms in a notebook, apparently believing this academic exercise was more important than getting immediate medical treatment. The manual's description of coral snake envenomation mentioned that symptoms could be delayed, but Carl interpreted this to mean he had plenty of time to observe and record his condition. Carl spent 30 precious minutes following the manual's suggested first aid procedures, applying a loose bandage and keeping the wound below heart level while carefully recording his observations. He was treating a serious medical emergency like a science experiment, following protocols designed for research settings rather than recognizing that he needed immediate professional medical intervention. During this critical time, the neurotoxic venom began its silent assault on Carl's nervous system. Unlike hemotoxic venoms that cause immediate pain and swelling, the coral snake's neurotoxins produced subtle initial symptoms that Carl dismissed as anxiety. He noted mild tingling around the bite site and slight nausea, symptoms he attributed to stress rather than recognizing them as early signs of systemic envenomation. As the venom spread through his lymphatic system, Carl began experiencing more concerning symptoms. His vision became slightly blurred, and he noticed difficulty focusing on his notebook entries. A slight slurring of his speech developed, which he initially attributed to nervousness. The manual had mentioned these as possible symptoms, but Carl believed he was still in the early observation phase. Carl continued documenting his condition for another 20 minutes, not realizing that the neurotoxic venom was rapidly progressing toward respiratory paralysis. By the time he recognized the severity of his situation, his breathing had become noticeably labored, and he was experiencing significant difficulty swallowing. Carl attempted to climb the basement stairs to call for help, but the neurotoxins had begun affecting his coordination and respiratory muscles. Halfway up the stairs, his legs gave out, and he collapsed, his breathing becoming increasingly shallow as the venom systematically shut down his nervous system. Carl lost consciousness on the basement stairs as respiratory paralysis set in. His family, unaware of his activities, did not discover him until several hours later, when they noticed he had missed dinner. By the time they found him and called emergency services, Carl had suffered prolonged respiratory arrest. Emergency responders attempted resuscitation, but Carl had been without adequate oxygen for too long. Despite aggressive efforts including intubation and cardiac support, he was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from respiratory failure caused by coral snake envenomation, with the critical delay in discovery preventing any possibility of successful treatment. The investigation revealed that Carl had collapsed approximately 35 minutes after the bite, well before his family discovered him. Medical experts testified that immediate medical intervention might have saved his life, but the isolated location of his basement operation and his family's lack of awareness about his activities had created a fatal delay in discovery and treatment. The basement investigation revealed an extensive collection with detailed records and charts copied from Carl's breeding manual. The manual was found open to the emergency treatment section, with handwritten notes showing Carl's methodical attempts to follow protocols that were completely inappropriate for his situation. Several animals had died from stress-related illnesses caused by improper housing combinations that Carl had misunderstood from the manual's breeding instructions. Carl's death was ruled accidental, caused by envenomation from illegally possessed venomous reptiles, with delayed discovery preventing medical intervention. Animal control officers required assistance from reptile specialists to safely remove and relocate the surviving 42 animals to appropriate facilities. Thanks for watching. If you liked these stories, click here.